Okay, today I'm introducing two people, not just one. Akiko Busch, I know because she's a fellow writer here in the Hudson Valley, and we actually our paths crossed when she wrote a book called 9 Ways to Cross a River, Midstream Reflections on Swimming and Getting There from Here, which is simply a wonderful book about swimming across rivers and lots of other things. And one chapter includes swimming across the Hudson River, which is something that you can do in one of the many organized swims that happen along the river, and not something I would recommend that you do on your own. But anyway, she has written about a range of subjects that are about place, geography, architecture, right up all of your alley planning, right? And her most recent book is The Incidental Steward, Reflections on Citizen Science, which some of you, not all of you, have gone through what we had at the college, which is citizen science, which actually has nothing to do with citizen science in the world. I hope that that's clear. That for some reason they called it citizen science, and it's really just sort of science that every citizen should know, as opposed to citizen science, which is actually engaging citizens in scientific questions that we have about the world. Does that make sense? We're clear about that? Okay, so studying infectious diseases is not citizen science. It's studying infectious diseases and things that you should know about that. Okay, so Akiko Busch is here with Doug Reed, who is the director of that.
Hudson Basin River Watch and Batten.
Okay, so is in charge of Hudson River.
Hudson Basin.
Hudson Basin?
That's the whole place.
Okay, the whole place.
And River Watch is what we do.
Okay, so maybe not so different from some of the work that Riverkeeper did that you've heard something about. And the Battenkill Conservancy. So the two of them work very closely together, and so one sort of much more in the field, and the other one in her office reflecting on it and putting words to paper. Blah, blah. She's doing the blah, 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 and he's doing the work. That's perfect division of labor here. Okay, so I hand it over to you. We're going to end a little bit early so that I can have you fill out the SOTC form, so just so heads up. Okay. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Susan. And thank you, Aki, for inviting me here. My name is Doug Reed, and I, as Susan said, am a Hudson River advocate and organizer and citizen scientist. Where I come from is right between those things, though, citizen and a scientist. In fact, I was a reluctant citizen when I was your age, not really wanting to raise my hand and do anything. I mean, I had plenty to do, but I wasn't going to be a model citizen. That was not my goal. In fact, I fled this country during the Vietnam War sympathetically with my good friend to settle in Canada. He had to go because he didn't want to go fight in Vietnam. And I came back and minded my own business, woodworking, building houses, about 100 miles north of here in southern Washington County, and fell into a river program. Somebody said, we're starting a group on the Battenkill, which is where my wood shop was. And I thought, oh no, they're going to ask me to do something. I'm not going to go. But I got curious. I went to a couple of meetings, and they were smart. They didn't ask anybody to do anything, but they had speakers, like I am here. And a guy came from the Audubon Society and talked about a water watch program he started in North Carolina. And he mentioned what that was. And I got curious and went down to the river behind my wood shop then and discovered these incredible little aquatic insect larvae that live on the bottoms of all freshwater streams around the world. And I started putting them under microscopes because this is how he described starting a citizen monitoring program of rivers. And I realized I can't do this alone. This is something that people do together. A river system is long, it's complicated, and I started putting together one person who knew more than me with another, and teachers were already doing it with their high school classes on this little river called the Battenkill. And together we built a program that took 5 different schools, environmental studies or environmental classes to the river on the same day, and they all studied biology, the biology, chemistry, and physical characteristics of their sites. We had about 10 different sites all marked out on the river. For years we were gathering together. We had conferences in the New York State Museum with other schools of doing it down the Hudson. And it grew to a whole River Watch program. The State Department of Environmental Conservation heard about us on the radio and introduced me to some bureau chief and said, here, take some money and go do citizen monitoring. I said, citizen monitoring? We're monitoring water, not citizens. And he said, well, this is what we have to call it in order to get you contracts. And they gave us contracts for years. And until about 2008 when everything just went. But what it did was connect all kinds of teachers, research scientists from a number of institutions, schools, high schools and colleges. And over the 15 years, we probably trained several hundred students, teachers, thousands of students. And it's still going on. The state is starting their own program now in not hiring or subcontracting the work. They're trying to do it themselves statewide. So it was a great initiative, and it's continuing. Going back to between the reluctant citizen and the scientist, I went back to graduate school in the early 90s to sort of get more educated in environmental studies, and took 2 internships with the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, their biomonitoring unit, and the U.S. Geological Survey. So one summer I traveled all around the Hudson River Basin with them in the field. And they were terrific. They were very generous, great scientists in their own right, but just keeping their head down, doing their work. And they didn't really want to hear about volunteers getting involved because it made more work for them. The state policy was volunteers can't do this work, or at least we don't want to pollute our data set with their stuff. They've changed. So after 15 years, now they have their own program. They see the value of it. And we had a very intensive peer-reviewed study of can citizens, students, actually this was mostly students that they were studying, can they provide meaningful data for water quality policymaking? And after years and writing it up and coming to conclusions, they put up a big report. Yes, of course they can, but that has to be very carefully designed from the beginning so that whoever's working with the volunteer knows their limits and can assure the data, whether it's, how it's done, when it's done, and it's carried through that way. Like any science project, you have to start with a good question and have a quality assurance plan. So we learned all that, and the program went very well. During that time, I volunteered. I went back to my volunteer status because it's where I have the most fun. It was not where I wanted to be. I was stuck in an office writing checks and invoices and reports to New York State. I went back out on the river with Aki and a group of about 20 different volunteers to survey aquatic vegetation, submerged aquatic vegetation at the Carey Institute here in Millbrook and Cornell and the Hudson River Research Reserve were all working together to survey these very important and unknown submerged aquatic vegetation beds that turn out to be critical habitat for small fish and cleaning the river, supplying oxygen to it. They hadn't any idea what was there. They knew it was important, but they hadn't done the research. So for about 10 years, they put together their own project, the scientists, and realized they couldn't keep doing it. It was too expensive to go out by boat and check about the data they were getting from flyover aerial surveys. Cornell sent or contracted with a company that took old-style photographs, converted them into stereographic images so that they could actually identify what looked like a submerged aquatic bed, and then they would go out and say, you know, verify the existence of that with a kayak or their own boat. They thought, okay, we'll do it with volunteers. We'll try the volunteer program. So in 2003, I signed up, and about 15 others. Their initial experience was good, so we're now in our 11th year. And what it is a lot of fun, because you get on the river in a boat. If you've never, has anybody been on the Hudson in a boat? Good number of you. And it changes everything. You think, okay, I think I know it. They gave us a good training day of about 4 hours, where they taught us how to use a GPS unit, gave us survey sheets, what each piece of information was that they wanted, why they wanted it. They explained the whole thing very quickly. They're really good at volunteer management, and they're very good scientists, so they know how to design a good program. So this is pretty much the whole equipment besides the boat that we need. So we get to the point, in this case it was Stockport Flats, which is about 5 miles north of the city of Hudson. Get the boat in the water, and immediately we're looking for coordinates on this little GPS unit. Everybody used to using these or know what they are? It comes from satellite information. And we're not getting anything in here. But so they typically gave us 30 to 40 target sites. And each one of those sites is laid out along a straight line called a transect on the water. You have no idea where you are unless you're using this. But their idea from the lab was laying out these straight lines and bracketing the image of the aquatic vegetation they can see from a map, the deep end out in the channel back to the shallow end, to sort of check out what they think they're seeing against what we report back. I've never actually been in their lab or office watching them use this information that we supply. It's probably not very interesting, but that's where all this information goes. They use it to analyze and to make recommendations for state policy, for their own research questions. You know, what is Vallisneria americana, which is a common name is water celery. You know, what are its functions? Where is it? What's the inventory of it on the river? And how is it changing on the river? They're discovering they really don't, even after 10 years, have a good handle what all the functions are and changes. But so we're on the river. This is guiding us through about 30 different points. Aki has this in her possession, these data sheets with the coordinates listed on the left-hand side, and we're looking for the location, which I say yes or no. Is there vegetation? The cover, is that the average or none? Let's see. The time, the depth, the water clarity, and then incidental notes. So it's pretty simple. Each point takes an average of 3 minutes, I'd say. So you hold that for now. That's your, so once I found one target point. I'm in the boat. And this drops, I throw this right in the target. And what it does is unravel quickly to the exact depth of the water at the time. So let's say it's like that. Or we'll say a meter. That's sort of average for these shallows, is these plants only grow where the light can get to them. And the river is murky. Cuts out a lot of light quickly. They found that 1.4 meters in the Hudson, pretty much no water celery. They can't get enough light. So it's from here down to about there. It needs water all the time, has to be covered all the time. It needs something or a meter or less. So we're looking at that kind of depth, but they want to know exactly the kind of depth. So we carried this, marked out to 2 meters, put it down. If it's 80 centimeters, that goes down in the data sheet. And just for my own interest, I always carry a thermometer. That tells water temperature. They don't even want water temperature, do they? And in case there's interesting birds to stop or anything else, we just very important to carry binoculars on the water. Now, out at the deep end, on the channel side of the transect, they want a test of water clarity. So my wife, Peg, goes, and this is her job. She drops the Secchi disc to the bottom, or till it disappears. This black and white disc will disappear when it's too cloudy to see. Typically in the Hudson, below a meter, you can't see it anymore. So you drop it and bring it up to the point where you can just see it and mark that. These little strings are tied at 1/2 and 1 meter intervals. And that tells them, I mean, sometimes you can't see anything in the Hudson farther than that. So it's really pointless to go out and look for water celery beds if the water clarity is, 20 centimeters. And that, it takes all day. So what we do is go out at low tide. 2 hours before low tide, 2 hours after. Gives us 4 hours total. We need the low tide in order to see these submerged beds. So it's a race. You try to get there, read the tide charts first. You get sort of used to the variations in the tide chart if you go to the same point all the time. But NOAA and the Hudson River have pretty accurate tide charts. And you aim for 2 hours before, get out to the first site, because it takes all 4 hours to cover 30 or 40 targets, especially if it's windy or it's raining, something, or anything can happen on the water. I didn't bring in one essential piece of equipment, so I don't have the boat here, but a life jacket. And they say always go with a friend or a partner, in case, just in case. And those are two important things. Though for the first 4 years, I was going alone because I love going alone on the river. And that took even longer. So I would take 2 days. I would go out, get as much as I could done the first day, camp on an island or a beach somewhere, which is a whole nother way of observing this great river. Just catch a quiet moment and then go out and work again. And that's the thing about this whole SAV volunteer program, is that you get to learn a lot more about it through working with a group of volunteers, working with these research scientists at Cary, working with Aki, who has a completely different way of looking at the river. I had come at it through a wannabe scientist kind of perspective. I should know, everything about the plants, the animals, the chemistry, And I was teaching high school kids and adult citizen volunteers how to do this. So that was my avenue to knowing the Hudson, in addition to hiking and reading a lot about it. But when Aki and I went out together, I read 9 Ways to Cross a River, to her book about swimming the river. I started thinking everybody's got a different avenue into knowing where we live. And I think that's the important part to me. And reading and hearing Aki's comments just sort of opened up a whole nother level of the Hudson. And I think that's where I'm going from here. I don't want to stay in an office anymore. It was very important to me then, and it's important for somebody to do that. Otherwise, the scientists and the volunteers won't go out there unless somebody raises their hand and says, yeah, I'll coordinate this program. But I put in my years, and now I'm trying to find, where do I land in between? I would suggest to you, just try it. Just, when you have time, doesn't even have to take more than a few hours. Volunteer for something that's on the Hudson or is on the mountains or wherever. You'll find out more in that little stretch of time than you can imagine. When Aki, we got back from our first day on the river, it was 2009, August, a really hot August day, and we worked in the morning. It was started at 8, we were done by noon, and she wrote a little email at the end, it's like a week later, just saying scattered notes about that day. She says, by 11:30, the tide is coming in fast. To keep the boat still while making notes, I nose it into a water chestnut bed. That's another kind of invasive aquatic vegetation. Otherwise, the upstream drift is too quick and I get swept away. It's a struggle to get back. It's like a mile paddle. I think we were going against the wind, against the tide, really tired, noon, hot. She says, a struggle to get back, very hot. We are tired, feeling cramped. 5 egrets are on the mud flats. When we paddle by, they suddenly are aloft. We are in a Japanese painting or poem. Doug said it's like sudden snow in August. How do you identify what's going on out here? Locate and identify the transects. Follow a ribbon of water celery. A sudden upheaval of snowy egrets. So that's my new secret treasure, trying to find what is the Hudson. Thank you for listening. I'm looking forward to discussing more with you guys afterwards.
I knew that he really liked to go out in the river buying summer, so I really had to sort of badger him to let me go with him, and he was really gracious in letting me do that. I knew he really liked to be around. So how many of you are male environmental studies students, but how many of you are also writers or interested in writing? Okay. Come on, put your hands up. This is my new book, The Incidental Steward. It just came out this month. My previous book, 9 Ways to Cross the River, both of these are place-based books. Neither one of them began as a book. They both, 9 Ways to Cross the River just began with a swim on a summer morning. That swim led to other swims led to other rivers, and it was, I had this sort of great sense of personal restoration that, it wasn't all that interesting, I didn't think to anyone else. But then as I went to these other rivers, I saw that
all of these rivers had their own stories of restoration. The story became a little bit bigger, and so somewhere in the middle of all of that, I thought, oh, the subject is larger than just me and my little swim, so, you know, maybe there's a book here. This book certainly, again, did not begin as a book. This book about citizen science began through total serendipity. It began quite literally through a knock at the door, right? I mean, sort of a knock at the door, that's such a metaphor. There's a knock at the door and you listen, whatever. But this was actually literally a knock on the door in May 2007. And who was knocking was an intern from the DEC. And he wanted our permission to go up into the woods behind our house and track a radio-tagged Indiana bat that was apparently roosting in the woods behind our house. The bat's summer habitat seemed to be changing, and the DEC wanted to learn something about this change in migration habits. So what happened is the bats, the bats hibernate in the winter in these caves near Rosendale across the river, about 35 miles away. And so as they left the caves at the end of the winter, about 20 of the bats were radio tagged, and then they were tracked. And this one bat had been tracked to these woods. So anyway, he knocked on our door and said, you know, can I go up there? DEC guys are always very gracious. They always ask landowners if they can, you know, go up there. So I said, yeah, of course, but, you know, only if you let me go with you. So that was how an hour later I was with him when he found a old black locust tree with kind of shaggy bark, and the bats were roosting under the bark of that tree. It was still light, it was late afternoon, but so it wasn't the bats that we saw, but rather this kind of very distant universe of sound that we heard, this very kind of soft, remote, clicking sound. Or rather, he heard it. I think I probably would have missed it completely. It was one of those things that was so subtle that it really had to be pointed out to me. But if you stood there very quietly and listened very carefully on that May afternoon, you could hear this distant, you know, kind of universe of sound. And then, you know, he found the bat, so he filled in his data sheet. It's tree species, its height, its canopy cover, its diameter, bark coverage, and then the GPS coordinates, so that crews from the DEC could come down for the rest, a couple of days a week for the rest of the summer and check how many bats were roosting, how many bats would fly out, kind of what their behavior was. And what I noticed was, or what I was aware of, was that he was very tuned into this kind of attentiveness, this kind of observation that I was not at all skilled in, and that was really interesting to me, just the way he was able to really pay close attention, and I felt that was something I really needed. And so that one project led to other ones. I started, you know, paying attention to other, and there were a ton of projects around the Hudson Valley, some of them on the river, some of them off the river, but that led to mornings, you know, with Doug looking for the subaquatic vegetation on the river. It led to, you know, going with Bowser. I know some of you guys are doing the eel project. It led to doing the eel project with Bowser, counting the herring as they came in, you know, sort of other projects. There are really a lot of them. And so I began to become really kind of immersed in and engaged in this thing called citizen science. So I just want to talk a little bit about what that is, because the definitions vary so much. And I noticed that you have this thing called citizen science here, and I had the same curiosity that Susan did. Is really? Okay, that's another way to look at it. Rick Bonney was an educator at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology when he came up with the term about 15 or 20 years ago. And Cornell Lab is where a lot of this started, certainly not all of it, but some of it. And their website calls it projects in which volunteers partner with scientists to answer real-world questions. That's a really good definition. Other people take a much broader view. Judith Enck is the Region 2 EPA administrator, and she defined it to me, a citizen scientist to me is anyone using the tool focusing on scientific measure or portrayal. And this was at a conference at which she showed a YouTube of, a couple of guys, looking out their window, overlooking the Gowanus Canal in Brooklyn after a big storm, and there was this wall of sewage, just raw, untreated sewage, coming down the canal, and they filmed it and posted it on YouTube, and she says, as far as she's concerned, these guys are true citizen scientists. So this is a really broad definition. My own view is that right now the whole field is in such a nascent phase that broad definitions are fine. We can narrow it down later. But I think however you choose to define it, non-scientists collecting research, collecting data for scientists, really continues an American legacy, a legacy in American naturalism. Henry Thoreau's records, you probably don't know this, but his records of what bloomed, went around, conquered, are still used today by scientists who are researching warming temperatures. Likewise, Franklin Roosevelt kept field notebooks of birds, and those are used today by climate scientists who are studying bird arrival dates and warming temperatures. So, this is, I think, to some degree in our heritage. But I think, and what I discovered and kind of what I decided, my theory when I was working on my books, is that there are a few factors that really, really distinguish today's citizen scientists from traditional American naturalists. The first is, and I'm sure you guys know all about this, is this real sense of urgency we have. Al Gore famously said that watching the evening news is like taking a nature hike through the book of Revelation. So I think whether it's a warming climate or habitat loss or a human burgeoning population of 7 billion plus, or thawing permafrost, or any number of other things, catastrophes of our own making are wreaking havoc on the natural world. And so I think, the sense of urgency we derive from that motivates many of us to get out there and, get the research. The second is new technologies, GPS, internet databases, interactive websites, mobile phone apps. All of this enable ordinary people to go out and get the data and share it in a pretty reliable way, or ways that were more reliable than they have been in the past. Third, I think it's really good economic sense for the scientific community to use free, unpaid labor at a time when their own resources are ever more stretched. They just never have the money to do the research they want, so why not use us volunteers? And finally, I think most of these projects are marked by a much more collaborative approach. The study of nature, I think, traditionally has been a kind of solitary enterprise. John Muir's Walk to the Sea, Thoreau's Cabin by the Pond, Leopold's Shack by the River. I mean, all of these are kind of solitary enterprises, and now I think just as often the study of nature can be collective, can be collaborative. When the snowy owl migrated last winter, 2012, from the Arctic to the lower 48 states in unexpectedly high numbers, their sightings were reported on eBird, allowing birders to share their information and really get it out there. So, no surprise then that today there are hundreds of participatory programs all around the country where volunteers can help collect data on everything from migrating monarchs to jellyfish to coral reefs to you name it. I think it was Thoreau himself who said, "Every poet has trembled on the verge of science." And I mention this because I'm a writer. I wasn't a science major. I went to Bennington College. I don't think I took a science course after, a biology course after 8th grade. I mean, it just was not in my realm of interest. But what I found when I started going out into the field on these projects is that there's much more of an intersection between science and humanities than I had ever expected. And that sometimes we even operate in the same spheres of knowledge. Wallace Stevens, the poet, once said that accuracy of observation is the equivalent of accuracy of thinking. And it's a message about paying really close attention that was not so different from the message I got from many of the scientists I met with and went out into the field with. And I think this is really important because we're living in a time when whatever field you're in, whatever discipline you're practicing. We live in an age of such specialization. So to find these convergences of thought and philosophy was really interesting to me. And also, at a time when our scientific literacy, for many of us, is at such an all-time low, again, these convergences were really, really sort of revelatory. Rick Ostrich is a geologist who educated me on the properties of myelin and ecline, which was ravaging the banks of Jackson Creek in LaGrangeville in southern Dutchess County, where I live. And he took me out there and he said one day, he said, science is just the best available knowledge we have at any one time. And that's almost exactly the way I've always defined poetry. So again, that was just, that was really one of those great aha moments. What was clear to me also in all these projects I went out in was this, I think we have this, we all share this human impulse to measure, to count, to kind of take measure of the world around us, whether it's, you're going out and counting the National Bald Eagle Census count in January, or just measuring temperature and rainfall. This impulse to take measure, I think, is something we all share, whether you're a citizen scientist or not. One of my favorite finds in my research is that aquatic geologists who are researching ice formation and ice melt in the northern hemisphere use records that have been kept for 5 centuries by Shinto priests in Japan's Lake Suwa. And the priests have been keeping records of when the lake melted and when a crack in the ice appeared on the lake, because it was their conviction that when the crack appeared, God had put his foot there. And I just love this idea of these scientists, basing their research on this kind of data collection. So it became hard for me to think that this instinct or desire to take measure of where we are wasn't universal. It's innately human. And certainly I found that in the people I met. What I found in my book was I wasn't just working with scientists, but it was really interesting to me who was out there, who the non-scientists were. There was a IBM manager who had been laid off from her job after 30 years. And she was amazing. She was using her administrative skills to go out into the field and document vernal pools in Red Hook. Actually, I think it was one of those projects was collaborative with someone here at Bard. But anyway, she was out there, using these skills she got at IBM to look at vernal pools. There was a Catholic priest I met who goes out every summer and mows down the invasive vine that's choking the woods or near his churches. That was fabulous. A sophomore from Poughkeepsie High School who was in the eel project who said to me one day, she said, I'm just going to learn more about eels than you ever knew was there. And she was excellent. So all of these programs, I think, offer a real sort of template for attentiveness. All of these, participatory programs really kind of generate this kind of attentiveness, this way of observation that I think, at the best of times, can further the partnership between scientific research and public knowledge. And certainly taking inventory of the river's water and celery beds was a great exercise to spend the morning kayaking out on the river. But when the information we got was able to reflect measurable facts about water quality, then trust me, the connection to the river goes a little bit deeper. So I'm just going to read a short section from my book about going out to the SAV beds, but I'm just going to tell you a little bit. Doug mentioned what the SAV was, but I'm just going to say a couple more things about it. It occupies about 6% of the river from Haverstraw to Troy, so that's a pretty big chunk. But where the plant proliferates varies over time. It's a really tough perennial, but salinity, pollution, marine traffic, all of these can work to diminish it, while sharp shards of winter ice can dig up the beds in the winter. So where it proliferates really varies from year to year. Taking measure of the wild celery is a way of taking measure of the river's water quality. But as Doug said, calculating its whereabouts does present practical problems. They take these aerial photographs every 5 years. But the aerial photographs can sometimes have glare, so they can sometimes be difficult to read. And they also can't tell you anything about water depth or water clarity. So it's difficult, it's difficult to use these 5-year aerials to really get the kind of precise information that you need. So that's why we go out every summer with this program with the Carry. And we go out with the GPS unit. One of the things I found in this project, as well as in a number of the other projects, is that it requires a kind of creative thinking and the reconciliation you have to do between what the digital information tells you and what you see with your own eyes, right? What you see, what scientists see when they go out into the field themselves is what they call ground truth, what you see. But you're always reconciling it with either satellite imagery or some kind of digital imagery, or in this case, aerial photographs. And I think this kind of reconciliation is something, it's something we do. You don't just have to be a citizen scientist to do it. I think it's something we all do. We live in this world now where digital information is coming at us all the time, and how we kind of square that with what we know, experience, and witness firsthand is, I think, something we're all called upon to do. So, and I think at the best of times, those two kinds of information can really inform and sustain each other. They don't always, but at the best of times they do. So I'm just going to read a short section about that, and what happens when you use that awful thing, that Garmin unit, which I just, thank God Doug is here, because he's so good with it, because I go to this training session every year to Carry, they give you this unit, and then they give you this exercise, they give you these coordinates, and you kind of, maybe you guys know how to use these, maybe you're different generation, good at it. They give you this list of coordinates, and you kind of do this, and you find it, you find the hemlock tree, you find the car, and you find these places they set up for you, and you think, this is great, piece of cake, I can do this. And then a couple of weeks later, you go out onto the river, and you have your list of coordinates, and you're on moving water, and everything changes. So I'm just going to read I'm just going to read a few pages now, then it'd be great to open this up to some questions. In a training workshop earlier in the spring, I done my best with the Garmin to find arbitrary waypoints at assorted outdoor locations near the Institute's parking lot, under the spruce tree over by the edge of the road. The frustrations of that afternoon were nothing compared to those of trying to identify a waypoint on a moving river. Water changes everything. Stuart, he's the scientist that runs the program. Stuart Findley has said as much at the training center. 75% of it is just getting there. Getting the data is only 25%. And I saw now what he meant. With the pull of the tide and the current, the faintest surface breeze, the inevitable drift of the canoe, or any of the other elusive factors that figure into a way a boat passes over water, the GPS coordinates were fugitive at best. What happens out on the river follows a less direct line. A surface wind on the river was enough to remind me that how we know where we are and gauge our position is always an elusive exercise. Small wonder that the data sheets ask that we document both the expected and the actual locations. It's not just the coordinates that were hard to pin down. The river world is always ambiguous, and for the proliferation of all the water weeds this time of year, for the acres of spatterdock spread out across the flats, and the wide beds of water chestnuts, the Stockport Flats are a curious place to take an inventory. The river here has been completely reconfigured, engineered and re-engineered from dredging decades ago. Continually washed by 4-foot tides, the islands, flats, and marshes are the result of dredge flows where the shallow water areas of the river were recontoured in the 19th and early 20th centuries to accommodate large ships traveling out to Troy and Albany. Within only a few feet, the depth of the river here can change abruptly from 4 inches to over 30 feet. Out in the channel, it's deeper yet. But where we were laying out transects, the river went from shallow to shallower and back again. The tide only added to the changeable boundaries of river and flats. One became the other quickly and constantly, and the contours of what was solid and what was fluid, what was water and what was ground, were continuously changing. Surely it was folly to imagine taking measure of any such place. By the second transect then, we were out of our boats and waiting. The river was 4 inches deep here, too shallow to paddle, and Doug got out of his canoe and just pulled it along, wading between waypoints. For all the clarity of the water and brilliance of the afternoon light, trudging through the shallows along the meadow of mudflats and spouter dock was a clumsy exercise. Along with the orange buoys, we were equipped with a Secchi disc, a black and white circular form that's lowered into the water on a string marked off with centimeter markings. Determining how deep the disc can be lowered into the water before it's no longer visible is a way to measure clarity which can be affected by sediment, precipitation, and wind stirring up the water. But with no place for it to go, the disc stayed in my kayak. Several dark shaded patches on the 2007 aerial photographs had suggested the existence of Vallisneria on this spot along the river. A vague triangle or blurry linear strip might indicate an area of growth. If the images were laid over one another, square over square, in an overlapping vertical arrangement that was oddly static and had little to do with the wide continuum of river, seamless and ceaseless on a summer afternoon. Not for the first time, I wondered about the wisdom of trying to match up the natural world with such obscure digital images. Doug laid out the third transect, but still nothing. The data sheets offer a range of choices for the density of the beds: none, sparse, average, or dense. And I continue to write repeatedly, none, none, none. But none, I knew, is still data. 0 can be data too. I've heard this statement more than once, and it's a good lesson. When we don't see anything, or hear anything, or say anything, or think anything. When we have nothing to go on, that too is information. This seems to be a known fact that transcends the boundaries of discipline. In music, silence can be as resonant as sound. In mathematics, 0 can have the authority of a number. Robert Lyman's white canvases are a primer in the richness of white space. Merce Cunningham's choreography is inquiry into stillness. Waiting for Godot, one of the most celebrated plays in the English language, is famously described as the play in which nothing happens. And in the words of abstract painter Ellsworth Kelly, the negative is just as important as the positive. Absence can be as powerful as presence. So we headed downriver, and though there was still no sign of the wild celery beds, Doug spotted a cormorant with a strand of it streaming from its beak. With its long, curved neck, the double-crested cormorant is graceful and goofy at once. And this one appeared to be floating downstream with a smug satisfaction, having come upon the Vallisneria before us. That's what's happened to all the wild celery, Doug sighed. The cormorants have eaten it. It's a new theory. Let's leave it to the scientists to figure it out. That's the great thing about citizen science. Is whatever you find, you just say, well, let them figure it out. Not until the fifth transect did we finally spot the watery tendrils, and then suddenly they're everywhere. Where they brush the surface of the water, they lie flat, combed by the current in an infinite variety of patterns. But beneath the surface, their dense growth was even more apparent. Now, as my kayak slipped across the water, it made a soft, rustling sound. We'd found what we wanted, where we wanted it, and when. An alignment of desire, expectation, and discovery that I recognized to be infrequent. Wild celery puts its roots in the riverbed, but its leaves grow as slender ribbons, no more than a 1/4 inch wide, but up to 7 feet long. If the water is dark and visibility low, it's easy to miss them altogether, to paddle across a bed and never know they're there. Looking closely now, though, I can make out their empire strands, a vast submerged spreadsheet of the river's health. The water had a different texture here. There was something exercise of locating transects about calling out the location numbers. It seemed to be a way of assuring ourselves that there's an order to what's happening out here. A way perhaps to catalog and identify the unseen. But the ribbons drifted and flowed in whatever way the current combed them, marking out a different, more tenuous transect. By now I knew what ground truths were and could identify their equivalents out here on the river. Water truths by nature, seem to be more transitory and elusive. I think that'll do for the reading. So we have, thanks. We have a few minutes. Let's open this up to questions. I'd love to hear what you're doing. I know some of you are doing the EEL project. Doug and I would love to hear about some of your experiences. Any of you are writers or trying to write about any of this, I'd love to hear about that as well. So, any questions for, yeah?
You talked about having to reconcile digital data with sense perception. I'm wondering if you've ever had experiences where the two have conflicted. You talked about the best is when they supplement each other. At best, they supplement each other.
Yeah, when I was doing the vernal pool project, we went out, this was a couple of springs ago, and let me see. The map we had, was it aerial photography? No, it wasn't aerial photography, it was some kind of satellite imagery. And so the vernal pools that we were looking for were indicated by this little kind of, shaded area. And the maps, there was a lot of trouble with funding that year. So the scientists and the guys putting the program together had a really hard time verifying, where the pools were. So the first pool we went out looking for, there was no vernal pool. And we looked and we walked and, we saw all kinds of great stuff, but there was no vernal pool. We thought, well, did it dry up, or we here at the wrong time, or we misreading the map, but it just wasn't there. And I think sometimes, in that case, I think the satellite imagery, I think it was perhaps tree cover, it was some kind of tree canopy, and it had, they sort of thought, well, that's a vernal pool, but it wasn't. So yeah, sometimes the map, you're looking for something that doesn't exist, and we could write a whole essay about that, right? So anyway, yeah. What else? Any other questions?
I have questions for both of you actually, but Doug was talking about sort of not wanting to be in an office, and I think that a lot of, maybe for some of these students here as well, that a lot of the romance of doing environmental work begins with just wanting to be outside or be in the cold or whatever, and then the minute you get a job, you're thrown into behind a desk. And I think I had some friends who were park rangers who, they started off sort of being rangers at the guns, and that was a lot of fun, and then they were promoted and they were sitting behind the desks. And sort of that how can you maintain sort of the romance of actually being out there doing it and having that be part of a real job, or maybe that's those jobs are super rare. I don't know.
Oh, I haven't. Desk job is definitely not. I mean, other than trying to write about it, but in terms of collecting data and doing that, what the scientists do.
Yeah, I mean, even it seems like a lot of the scientists are sitting back in their labs and waiting for the data that's coming in that other people are out there. I mean, that seems like an endless.
Yeah, all the research scientists I talked to said, well, for every day you're out in the field, you're going to have 5 days just data entry.
25.
Yeah, it's not. So I don't know if maintaining the romance is a good goal, because romance goes up and down. But any moment you're out is worth, everything.
Yeah.
But there's also moments in those, in the office. Though I don't like working with numbers and balancing books, there's a real satisfaction of doing something you don't necessarily like that allows you to do other things that you do like. The accomplishment of that is worth a lot. Even though I didn't want to stay in all those days, and it makes you cranky and frustrated when it's done, I always felt good. And, well, I did that, okay.
But I would suspect also, and I'm not having done this, this is just total conjecture, but that, it's one thing to find the data, but then to kind of collate it and put it together and find out what it means so people can use it when they're doing public policy or planning or, you know, whatever it's used for. That's where it really matters. So I would guess that, you know, all that awful desk work is actually really important.
Well, it is, especially with research science. You know, that's not what I am. I'm not a scientist. I respect them, and I got to know what it was. I know I'm not that. I'm much closer to Susan's writing, Aki's writing, and being outside and seeing it as a writer. But you know, what built the program was having the science umbrella and the educator entry. I wouldn't have had any contracts with New York State if it weren't through the education avenue. And that's another in-between. You're not just an advocate, activist, protester, and you're not just a knowledge worker in your lab. You're in between and interpreting one to the other. When I first met Susan, it was on a river summer trip that used to be a program taking teachers up and down the Hudson on a research vessel and ashore at various points throughout the Hudson to build a whole awareness and curriculum around the Hudson River. And we hiked up to Catskill Falls, where there's that wonderful painting. The Hudson River School started, and we had assignments of writing right at 8 in the morning. And we painted. And that was very special. We didn't have to you know, spend a lot of time in the office, but if you were a painter, you'd go back to the studio and grind away alone, which is, you know, it's the nature of the business. How many Eel Project people are there here? Can somebody give an idea of what that is? Because I've never been to an Eel Project day. What do you do?
You basically put on the waders and you go into the site location, and they have a giant net that's closed, and then you flip it inside out and then count how many you have and then release them. It's exciting.
Did you have a huge count recently? I've been reading huge numbers.
Yeah, I mean, I've done it all 3 years, and
Right.
this is significantly more than the other 2 years that I did. I was getting like 2 or 3 when I was going, and I hear that they're like the hundreds.
185 one day.
Mhm.
But I think what's interesting is sort of, I was down there monitoring the other day, and Bruce Robertson, who's been recently hired in biology here, came down and was helping out, and he said, well, what questions are being asked? Because, you know, it's like, how many are there? And then we also take 20 and we weigh those 20 and sort of check, I guess it's about the health of these eels, like how robust are they? And, but beyond that, sort of, you know, what are the populations and are they healthy? I have no idea, in fact, what the questions are behind this project, right? And so Bruce was like, what are the questions being asked here? And so, you know, I actually don't care what the questions are. And, and I'm just sort of wondering, you know, for you guys doing this work, like, and working with lots of volunteers, like, what questions are being asked? So as somebody who birds, I'm constantly posting my sightings on eBird, and I have no idea what's being done with that. But I'll still go out and bird and post them on eBird. Yeah. Right?
One of the things that I discovered, again, as a non-scientist coming to this, is that, you know, I would get involved in these projects and I would say, okay, so what did you find out? So what do we know? You know, what's the answer? And they would look at me, these scientists, like, and I just realized that, I mean, the answers are like so far away. There's so much information, and just, you know, the answers come in these tiny increments, and it was just a whole different way of looking at things, is these things take time. And yeah, the Eel Project, you know, you said Chris Bassett is running it, so, you know, what do you know now? And he's, well, you know, we're getting there, we're getting somewhere, but, you know, this idea of quick answers just isn't there. I mean, I came away from this whole experience just thinking basically scientists are much, much more familiar with doubt than the rest of us. They live with doubt. They understand doubt. It's the condition of their thinking. And that was a good lesson for me.
But also the length of these studies I think is interesting too.
Yeah.
You know, for something like Christmas burn count, if you do it 1 year, it means nothing. But if you do it 20 years,
Right.
you can see the difference in population.
Yeah.
Right.
Anybody else doing volunteer projects or environmental projects of any kind? Like internships? I mean, you're freshmen to seniors?
Well, I'm doing my summer, or this summer I'm doing my biology senior project on the periodical cicadas. And there's actually a website called Cicada Mania, which does this exactly. It recruits anywhere from the New England area and people that see emergent sightings of the periodical cicadas, and then they have a map of emergence and dates that's kind of like incorporating anyone who wants to into tracking the emergence of them, which is really important for the research that I'm doing.
So it's a completely different exercise, right, in the last 17 years. I mean, just in terms of, you know, just how the data is collected and how it's it's just a whole different, I think that's really interesting. Huh.
Anybody else doing? Yeah.
A few summers ago, I was dumping a bunch of lime in streams in the Adirondacks because of the acidification that's taking place, and because of I don't know, but this is, I wasn't really part of the project. I just went to dump lime in the streams a few times, but apparently there's reaching a point in the Adirondacks where the acidity is so high that a lot of the vegetation there is about to start dying if they don't raise the pH. So, and the only way to do that is either by dumping lime in the streams by hand or using helicopters, but helicopters apparently are pretty expensive.
Yeah. So you were actually taking lime out and
Oh yeah, we were just at a stream like
powdered lime?
Yep.
Agricultural lime?
That's right. Yep. Right in the stream.
Yeah. Seemed like a good idea.
Nathan and I just started working on golden clubs.
On what?
Golden club?
That's a plant, a spring flower?
It
Is it?
Yeah,
blooms for
it's
exactly a
flowering
week
now.
in May.
Yeah,
Huh.
it's flowering right now, actually.
Right? And you're doing this on campus?
Yeah, we're actually doing it in the base, like down by the
Right.
police station.
It's a pretty rare plant, and it blooms for a week in May, and I spent 10 years looking for this thing, and finally found one just last year. In fact, during one of the garbage cleanups, I was paddling along looking for bottles, and was like, here's this plant, and when you see it, there's no mistaking it. It looks like a riding crop, you know, riding crops coming out of the middle, and it's yellow at the end. I mean, it's just fantastic.
It's a water plant? Or?
Yeah, it grows in the
It's yellow flower or a stalk?
Yeah,
It's really cute.
it's going to take you a minute to get there. Yes.
It sort of grows exactly like the plants you were talking about, like a certain meter of water. And it needs, you know, it's in the tidal zone, so we also have to go when it's sort of low tide if we want to see them. Otherwise, right now we're just camera trapping to see what's grazing them.
Huh. And there is something eating it?
We haven't found anything.
But something is disappearing. Oh, my God. I have seen that.
Golden Club.
Wow. So it's covered with water part of the day?
Yeah.
It's a great
I
plant.
think once the plant is bigger, we're working with Eric Hilliard.
Yeah.
He said once they get bigger, even during mid-tide, we should be able to see them sticking out of the water.
Can we see it from the water at the Tivoli Bay?
I think you have
No.
to
We
go out.
have to go out, we canoe out.
Out on the Hudson?
Kruger Island.
Kruger Island? Okay. We'll go find it. It would be blooming.
Low tide, if you walk around, I'm sure, in the shallow waters you can see.
Okay.
There's another project I've heard about, and I don't know anybody who's done this, but for all of you who are technologically oriented, if somebody got involved, it would make me very happy. And I don't have a smartphone, so I couldn't do it anyway, but there's an app that you put on your smartphone, and when you find roadkill, you stop and you sort of upload what it is, how destroyed is it, where it was crossing, right? And then
And take a picture.
and you take a
Is
picture.
that a nationwide program? I've heard of that in California, but I didn't know that it was.
There's somebody, she's in northern New York State.
Oh,
I just
really?
stumbled, I'm obsessed with roadkill, and so, I stumbled on her website and, you know, gathering this data. So.
Oh, that's great.
Wow.
Yeah, mobile phone apps for like would change the whole thing, so.
That is it.
It's a crazy
What is it?
It's really destroyed.
What is it? You can't tell?
I think it's a squirrel, but it's like super mangled. It has some skin.
That's the problem, is identifying.
Yeah, that's gross.
Okay, on that note, thank you very much. I'm gonna, so you guys don't leave, I want you to fill out these forms for me, so just be patient. Thank you.